Welcome back. In the previous few steps, we talked a lot about the Spring Cloud Config Server. The Spring Cloud Config Server is used to manage all the configuration related to multiple microservices. So here we have multiple microservices and there would be configuration for each of these microservices for different environments. We saw how we can configure the properties for limit service for different environments using the Spring Cloud Config Server. All that we had to do was to create a few property files with a specific naming convention in the Git repository and commit them in. And then we were able to connect the Spring Cloud Config Server to the Git repository to be able to serve those configuration. We connected the limit service to the Spring Cloud Config Server to pick the values from the Git repository. So let's say you want now to connect another microservice to the Spring Cloud Config Server. What would be the steps that would be involved? Number one is you have to create those configuration in the Git repository and commit them in. So if I want to say currency exchange service and I would want to create the configuration for QA, I would probably name it as currency-exchange-service-qa.properties and put the property configuration in there and commit it down to the Git repository. The next thing you would do is to connect the currency exchange service to the Spring Cloud Config Server. So instead of application.properties, we would rename the configuration file to bootstrap.properties and put the URI for the Spring Cloud Config Server. Those are the only two steps which are involved. Once you have a Spring Cloud Config Server installed, connecting a new microservice to it is a cakewalk. The great thing about the Spring Cloud Config Server is now all application configuration is in one place. It's inside the Git repository. Once you restrict the access to the Git repository, all the application configuration is at one place and it's also very secure. One of the things that we saw was we had to restart the limit service to pick up the changes in configuration from the Git repository. And that becomes even more problem where there are multiple instances of the limit service. The reason why we call the limit service microservice is because we would want to be able to deploy it to the cloud and we would want to be able to have multiple instances of it running. And we would want these instances, all these instances to pick up the configuration changes as soon as they are available in the Git repository. And we would want to have an easy way of doing that. That's one thing we would look at in a later section on Spring Cloud Config Server. Let's put a pause on the discussion on Spring Cloud Config Server here and move into other important problems related to microservices. We will come back to Spring Cloud Config Server when we would talk about using Spring Cloud Bus to make sure that all the changes, all the configuration changes that are done through the Git repository are automatically reflected in the applications. Until the next step, bye bye.